Does the oil disaster in the Gulf of Mexico make a stronger case for clean energy, alternative energy? Well, former CIA Director James Woolsey has been quite outspoken for years now about America's need to end its oil addiction. It is not just an economic issue. He says it's a national security one. He's here with us now. Thanks for coming in today. I know for years you've been talking about the need to wean the U.S. off of foreign sources of oil. What happens now with this disaster? Is there, it's tough to say opportunity coming out of something as horrible as this, but does it change your investment?
In a sense, I've been talking about that, but I've also been talking about weaning away from oil, period.
Right.
Because the foreign aspect of it is that OPEC is the low-cost producer and has the huge reserves. So they're going to set the price. They're a cartel. They export about what they did in the 1970s, and demand has doubled since then because they're a conspiracy and restraint of trade. And they're going to do that even if we drill more domestically, because it costs us tens of dollars per barrel to lift and produce oil. It costs them in Saudi Arabia, for example, about $5.
There are many that would say, you know, OPEC may not be a cartel. They all kind of do their own thing when it comes to actually producing what it is that they want.
Well, what other evidence do they need than that they're pumping half of what demand's doubled, and they're pumping the same thing they were in the 1970s in order to keep prices up as high as they can get away with. That's what cartels do. And that gives them political power. If oil goes up to $125 a barrel, approximately, roughly half the wealth in the world is in OPEC, because the oil, as well as the larger reserves of oil that would come into play with higher prices, are there, as well as sovereign wealth funds and all that. So we have a strategic problem related to that. We borrow $1 billion a day now, nearly, in order just to import oil. And an awful lot of that funds, in one way or another, by going to the Middle East, funds the war against us. We're paying for both sides in this war on terror.
And this administration, though, has said, you know, from the get-go, they want to make, you know, energy alternatives a big priority. The skeptics would say nuclear energy, we're many years out from actually having any kind of plant up and running, that wind is too costly, solar not effective enough. I mean, you are at a VC firm these days, venture capital, making investments in this space. What do you think is the best alternative?
Those alternatives are a good idea. I think particularly solar and storage, improved batteries, and renewables for electricity generation. But since we make almost no electricity out of oil anymore, unlike in the 70s when 20% of our electricity came from oil, those issues basically don't have anything really to do with our oil dependence. We could build nuclear power plants or wind farms till the cows come home and not affect our oil dependence. Same thing is true of cap and trade. $1 a ton of CO2 in the price structure of cap and trade is about a penny at the pump.
You're a real skeptic that cap and trade should be...
No, cap and trade is one tactic. I tend to lean more toward a carbon tax rather than cap and trade. But cap and trade is one tactic to get our production of carbon down, but it doesn't affect the liquid fuels much at all. It affects things like electricity generation, but it has a negligible effect on oil use for transportation, which is 70% of our oil use. We need to do to oil what electricity and refrigeration did to salt at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. Salt had a monopoly on meat preservation. It was a strategic good. It was extremely expensive. People went to war over salt mines. That all changed with the electric grids coming. We need to do that to oil.
It's so hard to find someone who can make a really strong case and get support for it as to what that alternative is. In the wake of the disaster, I've been hearing from people that, you know, Canada, the biggest supplier of oil to the U.S., they're going to see more support for their tar sands, that companies like Total and Petrobras, foreign companies, are going to find more opportunities with offshore drilling because of a moratorium on drilling here in the U.S.
As long as we stay with a monopoly of transportation by oil, 95% of transportation is oil. As long as we stay there, whether we're getting it from Canada or from Brazil or whatever, as long as we stay on oil, we are in very deep trouble. We have to move to destroy oil's monopoly over transportation. And I don't think there's any alternative to that. And the way you can do it is by making internal combustion engines a lot more efficient. There's some great technology coming along there. Boone Pickens' idea about natural gas is good. Moving toward electrification of transportation, plug-in hybrids is good. Drop-in fuels like bio.
I'm sorry to cut you off. We've got to leave it there. Jim Woolsey.